Let's have a look at framing the problem. This may not be a familiar expression to you, but it'll become more familiar over time because design science, design thinking and innovation is becoming much more popular, and a lot of that starts with framing the problem, or framing the problem. And we're talking about a frame of reference. How do we look at the problem, and from what perspective do we look at the problem? And this is because what we see depends where and how we look, and we can do better by deliberately considering alternative perspectives. Right? For example, technology refresh, which I referred to before, could be considered to be a maintenance expense and therefore it should be minimized, or it should be a productivity investment and therefore it should be encouraged, or it could be considered to be simply a cost of doing business, in which case it's neither good nor bad, it's just something you accept as a cost of doing business, such as the cost of providing furniture for everybody. Now let's start by considering the stakeholders, because we don't produce frames of reference out of nowhere. We do have to produce them with some sensible connection to the problem. So we'll start with the stakeholders. Who will use what you produce? Right? You're going to produce something, whether it's a design or you're developing a product, or you're investigating something and producing some outcomes and recommendations. Who is that going to be for? Who's going to use that? Who is affected by it? Right? So in the case of technology refresh, several different people would be affected by it. The people who actually, the maintenance staff who do the technology refresh, the users whose systems are going to be disturbed, management is going to be disturbed, all that sort of stuff. What goals do each of them have regarding this problem? They all have goals. They have some desires on this thing, and they may all be different. So consider the stakeholders and their goals. And you might not actually be able to achieve all the goals, but you should at least identify them and consider them. We'll get around to resolving the goals later. Now the next thing you really ought to look at is the constraints. Are there constraints on the solution? Are there constraints on the problem as well? Obviously, with most of your investigations, you're going to be constrained in who you can talk to, or how much time you can take, or how much time you have available to use, what resources you're able to use. So there's usually constraints on time, cost, quality. Quality is usually at a minimum, but there could be a constraint the other way. You could be required to produce something that's not of the highest quality, simply because it takes too long. One of the constraints is political, particularly in large organizations. You have to deal with the organization's hierarchy and the power struggle there. The social constraints. So social and political do tend to line up a certain amount, but consider the social constraints. For example, we may not be able to do something that disturbs this other group over here, or you can produce something that would really upset everybody. Okay. There are also obviously technical constraints, or potentially technical constraints. Risks, same list. All right. What risks are there on the potential solutions, or what risks are there during the implementation, or what risks are there during the investigation? So again, time, cost, quality, political, social, and technical. All solutions do carry risks. Otherwise, they wouldn't be innovative. If there was no risk, it would just be business as usual. So if you're going to produce something new or propose something new, there is going to be some risk attached to that, and that's not the problem. All it means is that you have to identify what that risk is and to manage it. Now, what frames the problem now? Okay, after considering all this information, what frames the problem now? Who will benefit most or suffer most? What's likely to be the most useful solution if it can be found? Okay, so I guess you could look at the frames as being the perspectives of the different stakeholders. How do they perceive the problem? Look at it from that way. Now, as an example, the technology refresh stakeholders. We had users, their goals were they wanted the least disruption to their work and the least disruption to their work practices. That's sort of obvious, but too many people don't think of it that way. And what's a technically attractive solution we go for? Support staff. These people are going to be affected by the refresh itself. They're going to do it. So they want the least support effort. They've got a lot of work to do. They don't want another large job attached to them. So if you're going to land them with another job, try to minimize the size of that job. The extra workload of the refresh and the least support after it's done. Those disrupted by technology failure. Obviously, they want to avoid failure. If that's not possible, they want the least outage. So a technology refresh is going to take their system offline for a wee while. We want to minimize that amount of time and the time at which it occurs. And those who pay, so our paymasters, the organization itself, now clearly the least they can get away with paying, the better, commensurate with the potential solutions. So that's what the kind of things you ought to consider when you're trying to frame the problem itself.